Hi, my loves. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we're very close to 1,000 subscribers. Leave a like on the video, and I hope you enjoy today's video. I planned a surprise party for my husband, and he came home kissing another woman, thinking no one was there. My husband's 40th birthday was supposed to be one of those nights we'd talk about for years, just for a completely different reason than the one I ended up getting. I'd spent almost a month planning a surprise party behind his back, which sounds sweet until you know how terrible I am at keeping secrets. I hid decorations in my sister's garage, ordered a cake from a little bakery across town, and even convinced my mother-in-law to come in from out of town without telling him. The birthday mattered more than usual because his father had died at 39. Every year, as 40 got closer, my husband got a little stranger about it. Not dramatic exactly, but quieter, restless, like the number was following him around the house. The plan was simple. I told him I was sleeping at my sister's place because she was having a rough week and didn't want to be alone. My sister agreed to cover for me if he called, though she kept saying, "He's going to know. You lie like a nervous child." He didn't know. In fact, he looked almost relieved. He had a work dinner that night and mentioned, in the same casual tone he used for everything lately, that he had a business trip 2 days later. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, tying ribbon around little paper favor bags, and thinking how convenient the timing was because I'd be able to clean up after the party while he was gone. Meanwhile, he kissed my cheek, grabbed his coat, and said, "Don't stay up too late at your sister's." One of his oldest friends worked at the same company, and I'd asked him to help me with timing. He was at the dinner for the first part of the evening, so when my husband left, he texted me that he was on his way home. He also wrote, "He's had a few. He's walking fine, but he's definitely feeling it." Then, maybe 30 seconds later, another message came in. "Also, I don't know if this is anything, but he's been weird lately. I'll tell you later." I stared at that second message longer than I should have. I didn't want to wreck the surprise by spiraling over one vague sentence, so I shoved my phone into my pocket and went back to the living room. Everyone was hiding. My mother-in-law was crouched beside the couch even though I'd told her she didn't have to actually crouch, and my sister was trying not to laugh because one of our friends kept whispering that his knee was locking up. The house was dark except for a sliver of light from the hallway. I stood closest to the front door because I wanted to see his face when the lights came on. A car pulled into the driveway. A second set of headlights stopped near the curb. I heard one engine shut off, then the other. 2 car doors opened almost at the same time. There were footsteps on the front walk. Then his voice, low and loose from drinking. I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard a woman laugh. Not my sister. Not my mother-in-law. Not anyone in that room. I reached toward the wall for the light switch. But before I touched it, the front door opened, and my husband walked in with a woman attached to him. He had one arm around her waist. She had both hands on the front of his shirt, and before either of them noticed the dark living room full of people, he bent down and kissed her. Someone behind me yelled, "Surprise!" The lights came on, and the entire room went silent. My husband jerked away from the woman so hard he nearly lost his balance. She stumbled a step, looked around, and went pale. My mother-in-law was standing beside the couch with both hands over her mouth. My sister whispered, "Delaney," once, softly, but I couldn't look at her. I was staring at my husband, and he was staring at me like I had broken into his house and caught him doing something private. "I can explain," he said. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It came out as this horrible little sound that didn't even feel like mine. The woman smoothed down the front of her dress with both palms. I noticed that because when your life is cracking open, apparently your brain latches onto stupid details. Her dress was dark blue. One of her earrings was twisted backward. She had the expression of someone who had just realized she'd stepped into the wrong apartment. My husband rubbed his forehead. "This isn't what it looks like." My sister actually whispered, "Oh, come on." I finally asked the only thing I could think of. "Who is she?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked toward the woman. That was when his friend from work came through the doorway behind them. He had followed in his own car because he knew about the surprise. He took one look at the woman and stopped. "Oh," he said. Not loudly, just enough. I turned toward him. "You know her?" His face did something I still can't describe without getting angry. It was recognition mixed with guilt, like several little pieces of information had suddenly snapped together in his head. "She works with us," he said carefully. My husband cut in. "Don't." His friend stared at him. "Seriously?" I asked his friend. "What do you mean, seriously?" He looked at me, then at my husband. "I've seen them getting lunch a lot. I thought maybe they were working on something. They'd disappear into his office, but that happens at work." I didn't know. My husband snapped. You don't know anything. The woman looked at him. You said? He turned to her so fast it shut her up. And there it was again. That need to control the room, control the order of information, control who spoke and when. At the time, I thought it was panic. Later, I realized panic didn't explain how practiced he was at it. I asked her, what did he say? She looked at me like I was the last person she wanted to answer. He said you two were basically over. My ears rang while my husband said my name. I held up one hand. No, you don't get to say my name like I'm the one making this awkward. My mother-in-law finally moved. She walked straight toward him and said, tell your wife the truth. He looked at his own mother, and instead of collapsing or apologizing or doing anything remotely normal, his face tightened. Then he said, can everyone stop turning this into a show? A show, he called it. There were balloons behind him with his age printed all over them, a table full of food I'd spent 2 days making, and a cake that had cost more than I wanted to admit. I had invited his family, his friends, people from our neighborhood, and the man had walked into the middle of it, kissing another woman. But apparently I was creating the scene. We had been married 11 years, and if you'd asked me before that night whether my husband was controlling, I would have told you no. That answer would have been technically honest and completely wrong. He never told me I couldn't leave the house. He never checked my clothes before I went out. He never did any of the obvious things people picture when they hear the word controlling. What he did was smaller and easier to explain away. A few years into our marriage, he got promoted and we moved for his job. I had been working as a receptionist at a medical office. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the people. I liked knowing my schedule. And I liked seeing money land in my own account. When we moved, he suggested I take a couple months off to get the house settled and figure out what I really wanted to do. It'll be good for you, he said. You've been working since you were a teenager. I believed him. And after a few months, I started applying for jobs. He had an opinion about every one of them. This one paid too little. That one had a commute that would eat up gas money. Another one wanted weekend hours. And he said weekends were the only time we really had together. One job required business clothes, and he actually sat down with me and calculated how much I'd spend looking professional, compared with the salary. He wasn't mean while doing it. That was the problem. He sounded practical. Eventually, I stopped applying as often. Then I stopped telling him when I found something interesting because I already knew the speech. After a while, the temporary break turned into my role. He worked. I handled the house. He paid the bills. I trusted him. The house was another thing I never fully understood. It had belonged to his father. And after his father died, my husband always talked about it like it was his. He paid the property taxes. He handled the insurance. He arranged repairs. Whenever something came up, he'd say things like, I need to deal with the house, or, this place is my responsibility now. I knew his mother still had some connection to the property, but I never asked exactly what that meant. He always said he was taking care of it with her. My own mother didn't exactly help. I grew up hearing that marriage was private, and that good wives didn't drag outsiders into every disagreement. If my father sulked for 2 days, my mother called it keeping the peace. If he made a decision without her, she'd say, sometimes you let a man feel like the man. So there I was at 40's birthday party from hell, standing in a house I thought belonged to my husband, with no job, no personal savings I could access quickly, and no idea how much money we had. And the thing that scared me almost as much as the affair was realizing I had no clue what leaving him would even look like. Of course, I didn't have time to process any of that because my husband decided to make the situation worse in real time. He told me to stop making a scene and move away from the doorway. I said, excuse me? He gestured toward the hall like I was blocking traffic. I'm not doing this with an audience. We can talk later. My mother-in-law stepped between us. She's not going anywhere. He looked at her. Mom, stay out of this. No. I had never heard her say that word to him like that. He laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. This is my house. My mother-in-law stared at him for maybe 2 seconds. Then she said, no, it isn't. You could have dropped a glass in that room and heard every little piece hit the floor. My husband looked at his mother as if she'd slapped him. What? She pointed toward the ceiling, then down at the floor beneath us. This house is mine. It has been mine since your father died. You know that. You handle the bills because I let you handle them. He didn't look confused. That's the important part. He looked furious, and I turned to him. You knew? He ignored me. His mother kept going. You don't get to stand here and order your wife out of my house. His face went red. Why are you doing this right now? She actually laughed. But there was no humor in it. Because you brought your girlfriend to your wife's surprise party. My husband immediately said, "It's not that simple." His mother said, "It looks pretty simple from where I'm standing." My husband started pacing. "Everyone needs to leave." Nobody moved, and he looked at me again. I said, "We'll talk when this isn't a circus." I said, "You walked into the circus kissing a woman from work. I didn't know people were here." I stared at him. He hurt himself. I could tell because his expression changed for half a second. "So, if we weren't here, it would have been fine?" I asked. "That's not what I said." "Then what did you say?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "I'm 40. I've been thinking about my life, about Dad, about how he didn't even make it to this age." His mother went completely still. He kept talking anyway. "I spent years doing what everybody expected. I got married, got the job, kept the house running, handled everything, and I woke up realizing I don't even know if this is the life I wanted." "You are using your dead father to explain why you cheated on me?" "I'm explaining where my head has been." "No, you're putting a sad little ribbon around it so you can feel deep." My sister made a noise behind me that might have been a cough covering a laugh. My husband glared at me. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always have to turn everything into an attack." The cake was on the dining table about 3 feet from me. It was a ridiculous cake, honestly. 2 layers, chocolate filling, his favorite frosting, little gold decorations, the whole thing. I had spent more than I should have because I wanted the day to feel special. I picked it up. My sister said, "Don't," which naturally made me want to do it more. I walked straight toward him and shoved the cake into his chest, not his face. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wanted that stupid perfect cake off my table and on the person who had ruined the night. The frosting exploded across his shirt. Some of it hit the woman's dress. She gasped. "What the hell?" I said, "Sorry, I guess I'm making a scene." My husband stared down at himself, then at me. Then he said very quietly, "You're unbelievable." And that hurt more than if he'd yelled. The woman grabbed a stack of napkins from the table and started wiping frosting off her dress. She was angry now too, which I almost respected. At least one person in that room besides me was having an honest emotional reaction. She looked at my husband and said, "You told me you barely spoke." I froze. He said, "Not now." She ignored him. "You said you were basically separated." I turned to her. "We had breakfast together this morning." Her face changed. I kept going because once I started, I couldn't stop. "He kissed me before work. We picked out a new lamp last weekend. He asked me yesterday if I wanted to go visit my sister next month." "Is that what he told you separation looked like?" My husband said my name again, more sharply. The woman stared at him. "You said she knew." I said, "I knew what?" She looked like she wanted to disappear. That things were over. They were not over. He stepped between us. "Enough." I moved around him. "How long?" She swallowed. "A few months." My stomach dropped. His friend from work was still near the front door. And when I looked at him, he looked sick. "I saw them getting lunch," he said. "A lot. I should have said something, but I didn't know." My husband snapped, "Because there was nothing to know." The woman turned on him. "Are you kidding me?" I stepped toward her. I wasn't going to hit her, but I was close enough that my friend grabbed my arm and said, "Hey." "No." I pulled away and immediately felt embarrassed. She had known he was married, which mattered to me, but she had also clearly been lied to. And my husband seemed terrified that she might say something else. My mother-in-law looked at her son and said, "Go upstairs, change your clothes. Then leave." He stared at her. "You can't be serious." "I am. This is between me and my wife." "Then maybe you shouldn't have brought another woman into the house." The last guests started leaving after that. Nobody knew what to say. One friend hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. Another just squeezed my hand. My sister stayed. His friend stayed for a few minutes longer, apologized to me twice for not putting things together sooner, and then left looking miserable. The woman went outside. I could see her through the front window standing near the curb, arms crossed, staring at her phone. My husband went upstairs covered in cake. I sat at the dining table and stared at the empty spot where the cake had been. That's the image I remember most from that night. Not the kiss. Not his face. The empty cardboard circle from under the cake smeared with frosting, sitting in the middle of the decorations. A few minutes later, I heard drawers opening upstairs. My sister sat beside me. "Come home with me." I shook my head. "You don't have to stay here tonight." "I don't know where else I'm supposed to be." My mother-in-law, standing across from us, said, "Here, you're supposed to be here." I looked at her, and for the first time all night I cried. He came downstairs about 20 minutes later wearing jeans and a clean shirt, carrying a small suitcase. The suitcase bothered me immediately because it looked too neatly packed for something he had thrown together in 20 minutes. Then I remembered the business trip he'd mentioned. "You already had that packed," I said. He looked at the suitcase like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "For work." "Sure." He exhaled. "I'm not doing this." "No, apparently you're doing several other things." He rolled his eyes. That tiny gesture almost set me off again. He pointed toward my shirt, which had frosting on it too. "You need to calm down. You assaulted me in front of people. With a cake. That doesn't make it okay." And annoyingly, he was right about that part. I had shoved something into him. I knew it was impulsive and stupid, but the way he said it made it sound like the cake was the central crime of the evening. I said, "You brought another woman home." "I know what I did." "Do you?" He picked up his coat. "I'm going to a hotel for a few days. We'll talk when you're capable of having a normal conversation." I actually stood up. "You don't get to grade my reaction to finding out you're cheating on me." He looked toward his mother. "Are you really going to let her stay here after that?" His mother stared at him. "Yes." He laughed once, but it came out bitter. Unbelievable. Then he walked out. The woman was still outside. They spoke near the car for less than a minute. I couldn't hear what they said. She looked angry. He looked tired. Then they got into separate cars and drove away. I stood at the window watching his taillights disappear and had the strangest thought. I had no idea which parts of the past few months had been real. The late meetings, the work lunches, the nights he said he was too tired to talk, the sudden interest in taking better care of himself, the phone he started placing face down on tables. I had noticed all of it and attached normal explanations because I loved him. My mother-in-law stayed that night. So did my sister. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door opening again. The next morning, I got up because the refrigerator looked ridiculous. We had party food everywhere, but almost nothing normal to eat. I decided I wanted eggs, bread, coffee, and something boring enough to prove the world still existed. My mother-in-law came with me. At the grocery store, I filled a small cart. Nothing excessive. When the cashier rang it up, I handed over the card I always used. The card was declined, so I blinked at the screen and asked, "Can you try again?" She did. And it was declined a second time while people waited behind me. I could feel them waiting. I opened the banking app on my phone, but I couldn't see the main account details because the account wasn't mine. The card was an additional card tied to his account. I called the number on the back while standing near the carts. After several minutes of menus and verification questions, I learned that the spending limit on my additional card had been cut down. The limit had been reduced, which meant he hadn't just left. Sometime between leaving the house and that morning, he had made sure I couldn't spend like I normally did. I put back half the groceries. My mother-in-law tried to pay for everything, and I refused at first because I was embarrassed. She finally said, "Please don't make me argue with you in front of the bananas." That broke me enough to let her pay. In the parking lot, I called my mother. I don't know why. Maybe because no matter how old you are, there's still some stupid little part of you that expects your mother to say the right thing when your marriage blows up. She listened while I told her about the affair, the party, the cake, the card. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I know he was wrong." That sentence had a but attached to it before she even said the next word. "But you didn't need to humiliate him in front of everyone." I actually looked at my phone to make sure I hadn't called the wrong person. "What?" "You pushed a cake into him, in front of his mother, in front of his coworkers." He walked in kissing another woman. I said he was wrong. "You're saying that like it's a parking ticket." My mother sighed. "You've always had a temper. You know that. Remember when you were 16 and you threw that glass in the sink?" I laughed because otherwise I would have screamed. "We're talking about something I did as a teenager now? I'm saying this didn't come out of nowhere." There it was. My entire childhood in one sentence. Somebody hurt me. I reacted badly, and suddenly the reaction became the story. I hung up. She called back twice. Then she sent messages. I didn't answer. My mother-in-law was sitting in the passenger seat looking out the window. After a minute, she said, "I used to do that to him too." I turned toward her. "Make excuses," she said. "Not for something like this. I didn't know about this. But when he was younger, if he was rude, I'd say he was tired. If he didn't call, I'd say he was busy. If he made everything about himself, I'd say he was under pressure." She rubbed her palms together. I thought I was being a supportive mother. I didn't know what to say. Back at the house, she finally explained the property situation in a way nobody had ever explained it to me. The house had belonged to her husband. After he died, the title transferred to her. She moved away a few years later because she wanted a smaller place closer to her sister. She let her son stay in the house and later let us stay there after our move. He handled the taxes, insurance, and maintenance because he was local, and according to her, good with paperwork. He had never owned it, not part of it, not secretly, not eventually. I sat at the kitchen table and said, "He always called it his house." "I know." "And you never corrected him?" She looked ashamed. "Not really." "Why?" "Because it seemed harmless." I laughed without humor. Nothing is harmless when the same person gets to define everything. She didn't argue. Then I told her more than I had ever told her about our finances. How he had discouraged me from going back to work. How I didn't know our savings balance. How I didn't know exactly what debts we had. How I used a card tied to his account for almost everything. How he handled our taxes and passwords and insurance renewals. She looked genuinely shocked. "I thought you wanted to stay home," she said. "I thought I wanted it too, eventually." That was hard to admit. She reached across the table, then stopped before touching my hand. "You can stay here." "For how long?" "We'll figure it out." I shook my head. "I don't want charity." "It's my house," she said. "And I'm not giving him the power to throw you out of it because he's angry." Then, because she was still his mother and because people are messy, she added, "I love him. I'm not going to pretend I don't. But loving him doesn't mean helping him do this." That was the first thing anyone said that felt solid. A few days later, I met with a lawyer. I went alone because I needed to do at least one thing without somebody holding my hand. I brought my phone, a folder of random documents I barely understood, and one useful message from my husband saying he was staying elsewhere and didn't plan to return until things settled down. The lawyer asked me basic questions. "Do you know what accounts you have together?" "Not exactly." "Do you know the balances?" "No." "Any retirement accounts?" "I think so." "Any personal loans?" "Maybe." "Any credit card debt?" "I don't know." By the fourth, "I don't know," I wanted to crawl under the desk. The lawyer didn't judge me. That almost made it worse. She just kept writing. Finally, she said, "You need to stop being embarrassed about what you don't know and start finding out." That sentence became my entire personality for the next month. I opened my own bank account. I put in the small amount of cash I had from birthday money, loose savings, and a few things I returned. It wasn't much, but seeing an account with only my name on it made me weirdly emotional. I changed the password on my email. Then I realized I couldn't remember the password to another account I'd had for years, because my husband had always logged in for me. I spent an entire afternoon resetting things and getting angrier with every verification email. The house situation also had to be handled carefully. My first impulse had been to change the locks immediately, but the lawyer told me not to turn a marital dispute into a bigger mess by improvising legal rules. She advised my mother-in-law, as the actual owner, to document in writing what access she was allowing and arrange a time for him to collect personal belongings. So that's what we did. Once that was sorted, the lock was changed. We installed a simple camera at the front entrance, not because I thought he was going to kick the door down, but because I didn't trust him not to show up and start another argument. He hated it. His message came late that night. "You need to stop acting like you own that house." I stared at it for a full minute before replying, "I don't. Your mother does." He wrote back almost immediately, "She'll come around." That phrase chilled me more than a threat would have. Not because I thought he was dangerous. I didn't. But because it told me exactly how he saw his mother. She wasn't a person who had made a decision. She was someone temporarily malfunctioning. The next morning, his friend from work called me. He sounded nervous. "There's something I should tell you." I sat down at the kitchen table. "The woman from the party works directly under him." I closed my eyes. "Directly?" "Yeah." He explained that she was on my husband's team and that he approved some of her work, performance feedback, scheduling, things like that. He had noticed the lunches because it was unusual, but not so unusual that he'd immediately assumed an affair. "Did you ever see him favor her?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "That's why I didn't say anything. I don't want to invent stuff. But the relationship itself could be a problem there." After we hung up, I sat with that information for hours. Then I called my lawyer. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked what I was hoping would happen. I hated the question because I knew the answer. "I want there to be a consequence." She said nothing. I added, "And I know that sounds vindictive. It sounds honest." Then she warned me about the part I hadn't really considered. If he lost income, it could make the financial side of the divorce more complicated. There was no guaranteed dramatic payoff where he got fired and I magically benefited. Real life doesn't work like that. For the first time since the party, Revenge and self-interest were pointing in opposite directions. I spent 3 days arguing with myself about whether to contact his company. My sister said yes immediately. My mother-in-law didn't. When I told her the woman had been his direct subordinate, she closed her eyes and muttered something under her breath. Then she said, "Are you sure you want to involve his job?" I bristled. "You think I should protect him?" "I didn't say that." "It sounds like it." She looked hurt, then irritated. "I'm still his mother. I can think what he did was wrong and still not enjoy watching his life fall apart." That shut me up, because she was right. I had gotten used to people choosing sides so aggressively that I was starting to treat any hesitation as betrayal. "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded. "I just want you to think before you do something you can't undo." So I thought. Then I reported it. I didn't send a dramatic message. I didn't accuse him of giving her promotions or money or special treatment because I didn't know that. I said what I had personally witnessed. He had brought a woman from work to the house. He had kissed her in front of several people, and during the confrontation she said they had been involved for a few months. I had since learned that she reported directly to him. I gave my contact information. Then I hit send and felt sick. For the next week, nothing happened that I could see. My husband didn't call me screaming. Nobody from the company contacted me. Life became paperwork, awkward texts, and the strange task of separating a marriage while the person you married is still very much alive and still capable of annoying you. He messaged me mostly about belongings. "I need the black coat. I need the folder from the desk. I need my old laptop." I boxed things up and put labels on them. Then he'd slip in something emotional. "You really think this is all on me?" Or, "You seem pretty comfortable living in my family's house." Or my favorite, "You're enjoying this." I wasn't. That was the part he couldn't understand. I could be furious and still miserable. I could want consequences and still miss who I thought he was. I could hate what he had done and still automatically reach for my phone when something funny happened, because for 11 years he had been the person I told first. A few weeks after the party, the day we'd arranged for him to collect his things finally came. My mother-in-law came over so I wouldn't be alone. Though again, I didn't think he was going to hurt me. I just didn't trust the conversation. We placed the boxes in the garage. When he arrived, he looked thinner. That irritated me too. He got to look tragic after blowing up our life. He stared at the boxes for a long time. "You packed everything." "Most of it." He lifted the lid of one box and saw folded shirts, a framed photo, some old books. Then he said, "So that's it? 11 years in boxes?" I folded my arms. "You left." He looked at me. "You made it pretty clear I wasn't welcome. You brought your girlfriend home. She isn't my girlfriend." I almost laughed. Great update. He looked toward his mother. "Are you really going to stand there?" She said. "I'm here to make sure this stays calm." "That's not what I asked." She didn't answer. He loaded the boxes into his car one by one. At first he tried to act angry, but by the last few he just looked tired. Before leaving, he said to me, "You're acting like none of this hurts you." That caught me off guard. "It does," I said. His face softened for half a second. Then I added, "It just doesn't mean I want you back." The softness disappeared. After he drove away, I went upstairs and cried so hard I had to sit on the bathroom floor. About a month later, my mother-in-law got the call. She was at my house. Her house. Technically, though, by then we both jokingly avoided saying either version when her phone rang. She answered, listened for maybe 10 seconds, and her whole face changed. She stepped into the hallway. I didn't try to listen, but my husband was loud enough that I caught pieces anyway. Because of her. Then, she contacted them. And finally, "I need help." When my mother-in-law came back, she sat down slowly. He was fired. I felt a cold rush through my chest. For the relationship? Partly. According to what he told her, the company investigated the relationship, reviewed messages, and found that he had never disclosed it. There were also concerns about evaluations he had completed for the woman while they were involved. I asked, "Did they say he changed her evaluations?" "I don't know." He was yelling. He said they claimed there was a conflict of interest. That was enough. He blamed me completely. Not the affair. Not the undisclosed relationship with someone he supervised. Me. Then he asked his mother for money. She said no. Not forever. Not with some grand speech about consequences. She simply told him she wouldn't pay his ongoing expenses. She offered to help him find a temporary room or apartment if he needed somewhere cheaper. He refused. He said he's not moving into some depressing little place like a college kid, she told me. I almost smiled. Then I guess he's not that desperate. She gave me a look that said not now. A few days later, he called her again and apparently let it slip that the woman from work had stopped seeing him after the investigation started. My lawyer had warned me the job loss could complicate financial negotiations. And she was right. My husband suddenly acted as though every dollar was evidence of my cruelty. He complained that I had destroyed his career and therefore shouldn't expect him to be generous. I kept reminding myself that I had not fabricated anything. I had reported facts. Still, I also had to admit I didn't report them because I was passionately committed to workplace ethics. I reported them because I wanted someone besides me to look at what he did and say, "This has consequences." The divorce dragged on for months, mostly because getting a clear financial picture took longer than I expected. Then one afternoon, my lawyer called and said, "We found something you need to see." There was a savings account in my husband's name alone. Not illegal, not magical, not some secret offshore fortune, just a regular account I didn't know existed. There was enough money in it to matter. A lot more than I had in my brand new little account. The deposits went back years. Years. I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office afterward and stared through the windshield. He had spent years telling me we had to be careful, that a receptionist's salary wouldn't add enough to justify me working, that we couldn't afford certain trips, that replacing the worn couch could wait, that he was the responsible one because he understood money. And all that time, he had been moving money into an account I didn't know about. At mediation, he tried to explain the account. I was saving. I said, "From me? For us." Then why didn't I know? He looked at the mediator instead of me. Because she gets emotional about money. I laughed. My lawyer put a hand lightly on my arm. Not to silence me exactly. More like a reminder that I was paying her to be the calm person in the room. My husband continued, "I was trying to be responsible. Somebody had to." There was that word again. Responsible. It had been his favorite word for making control sound like a service. My lawyer asked where the deposits came from. The discussion stayed boring, which was probably good. Salary, transfers, savings over time. No secret crime, no giant hidden inheritance, just money accumulated during the marriage that I had been deliberately kept ignorant about. Then my husband brought up the cake. Of course he did. He said, "We're pretending she's the calm, reasonable one, but she attacked me in front of everyone." I said, "With frosting." My lawyer shot me a look. I shut up. The mediator asked him to stay on the financial issue. He kept going. "It shows her behavior. She loses control." My lawyer didn't deny it. That surprised me. She said, "My client reacted impulsively in a humiliating and emotional situation. She acknowledges that. An isolated incident with a cake doesn't change the classification of funds accumulated during the marriage." I looked at her and thought, oh, that's what it feels like when someone doesn't need to pretend you're perfect in order to defend you. That mattered more than I expected. I had spent most of my life believing I needed to behave flawlessly if I wanted to be treated fairly. My mother had trained me that way. My husband had benefited from it. If I raised my voice, the volume became the problem. If I cried, I was unstable. If I got angry, suddenly we were discussing my tone. The cake was stupid. I still deserved access to the truth about my marriage. Both things could be true. After several more weeks of negotiation, we reached an agreement. I got a portion of the money that had been saved during the marriage and a fair split of the other marital assets we could actually identify. It wasn't life-changing money. I didn't suddenly become wealthy. It was enough to breathe. Once the legal part ended, I had no excuse left not to face the part I had been dreading most. Work. My resume looked like it had been abandoned in another decade. I updated it 3 times and still hated it. My sister helped me change the formatting, then told me to stop apologizing in the summary section, which I didn't even realize I was doing. At my first interview, the manager asked why I had been out of the workforce so long. I froze. There were professional ways to answer that question. I had practiced them. Instead, I said, "My husband's job moved us, and I ended up staying home longer than planned." Then I heard how small that sounded and started explaining too much. By the time I left, I knew I hadn't gotten it. I sat in my car and cried for 5 minutes. Then I got mad at myself for crying. Then I laughed because apparently this was just my new process for everything. The first job I got was temporary work at a small retail shop. The pay wasn't great. The hours changed week to week. My feet hurt constantly because I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand for an entire shift. I loved it. But I loved getting a schedule with my name on it. I loved clocking in. I loved knowing exactly what I had earned. The first week, a coworker who was probably 15 years younger than me showed me how to use the store system. She moved through the screens so quickly I finally said, "Can you do that again like I'm someone's confused aunt?" She laughed and slowed down. I wrote steps on a piece of paper and kept it in my pocket. There were days I felt ancient, even though I wasn't. I'd spent years hearing my husband tell me that going back to work would be inefficient, and now every mistake felt like proof that he had been right. I signed up for a short administrative refresher course. I paid for it myself. The first night, I almost left during the break. Everybody seemed faster. They knew software I had barely touched. One woman casually mentioned she was taking the course to strengthen her resume for a promotion, and I sat there thinking, I'm taking this because I forgot how to make a decent spreadsheet. I stayed. A few months later, I interviewed for an administrative position in a small office. When the manager asked about my employment gap, I didn't panic. I said, I stepped away from paid work after a family move. I've recently returned, completed updated training, and I'm looking for something stable where I can rebuild. I got the job. The position was simpler than the receptionist job I'd had before we moved. I didn't care. The morning my first paycheck hit my account, I stared at the balance while sitting in my car outside work. I wanted to buy a new pair of shoes, because mine were falling apart. My first thought was, I should check if it's okay. Actually, not even check. I thought, how am I going to explain it? Then I sat there and realized there was nobody to explain it to. I bought the shoes after work. They weren't expensive. My relationship with my mother stayed strained. She kept sending messages that were half apology, half lecture. I'm sorry you felt unsupported, but I was only worried about how angry you were. Or, I hope someday you can see I was trying to keep things from getting uglier. Eventually, I replied once. I'm not discussing my reaction anymore as a way to avoid discussing what he did. If you want a relationship with me, stop making me responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his choices. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then she wrote, I need time. I thought, take it. My former mother-in-law and I, strangely, got closer. She would say, I know he hurt you, but he's still my son. And I would say, I know. I would say, I'm sorry. That was harsher than it needed to be. And she would say, you're allowed to be angry. It wasn't perfect. That was why it worked. By then, I had been living in her house for months, and I started feeling uncomfortable in a different way. At first, staying there had been survival. Then it became convenient. The divorce was over. I was working. I had money from the settlement. I could technically stay because she had told me I could, but I didn't want my independence to depend on my former mother-in-law forever. So I started looking at apartments. Small ones. Very small ones. The first place I toured had a kitchen so narrow I could open the refrigerator and block the entire walkway. The second smelled like somebody had smoked there for 100 years. The third was clean, quiet, and slightly more expensive than I wanted. I stood in the living room measuring a wall with my phone and realized I was smiling. I could picture my things there. I signed the lease. When I told my former mother-in-law, she got teary. I hoped you'd stay longer. I know, but I'm proud of you. I groaned. Don't make it emotional. You shove one cake into someone and suddenly you're afraid of emotion? I laughed so hard I nearly choked. A little over a year had passed since the birthday party by the time I started packing. One evening, while we were sorting kitchen things, my former mother-in-law got a message from my ex-husband. She read it, sighed, and set down a plate. What? He knows you're leaving. I stopped taping the box. How? I told him. That was fair. It was her house. And he wants to move back in. I stared at her. Seriously? He says it doesn't make sense for the house to sit empty. I started laughing. Not because it was funny, exactly, because it was so perfectly him. A year later, after everything, he still looked at the house and saw something temporarily withheld from him. What are you going to say? I already said no. I stopped laughing. She kept wrapping dishes. He thinks I'm punishing him, she said. Are you? She thought about it. A little. I appreciated the honesty. Then she said, and mostly I don't want to go back to how things were. I let him treat the house like his. I let him assume I'd always fix things. I don't think that helped him. I didn't say anything. She added, I offered to help with the first couple months of rent somewhere else. I raised an eyebrow. I'm his mother. I know. He said no. Of course he did. She smiled sadly. Of course. My move took most of a weekend. My sister helped. A coworker came for a few hours. My former mother-in-law supervised the boxes like she was running a shipping warehouse and kept trying to slip extra kitchen towels into my car. The furniture situation was a mix of things from the divorce and things I'd bought after. That distinction mattered to me more than it should have. This chair came from the marriage. That lamp I bought. This table used to be ours. Those dishes are mine. On the final afternoon, I stood alone in the old bedroom for a few minutes. I expected memories to hit me. They did, but not in some dramatic wave. Not in... I remembered folding laundry on the bed, fighting about a broken air conditioner, laughing because he once tried to fix a drawer and made it worse, lying awake while he snored. Normal things. That was almost harder than remembering the betrayal. The marriage hadn't been fake every second. It had been real enough for me, and that was something I had to grieve without using it as a reason to return. That evening, I got a message from my ex-husband. We barely spoke by then. Most communication had faded once the divorce was final and the financial issues were done. The message said, "I hope you're happy. You turned my own mother against me." I stared at it. There were at least 10 responses in my head. I could have told him his mother was not a chair I had moved to my side of the room. I could have reminded him that she had offered him help. I could have listed every choice he had made. I could have said, "You did that yourself." That one was tempting. Instead, I read the message once more and archived it. No reply. My first night in the apartment was chaos. Boxes everywhere. No curtains yet. The refrigerator made an annoying little clicking sound every few minutes. My bed frame was missing one screw, and I had no idea which box contained the shower curtain. I ate takeout sitting on the floor. Then I looked around and thought, this is mine. A few days later, I found a small table for the kitchen. I stood in the store looking at the price tag and did the same old mental math. Can I afford it? Yes. Do I need permission? No. Should I wait until someone else decides whether it's responsible? No. I bought it. When I got home, I assembled it badly, realized I had put one piece on backward, took half of it apart, swore a lot, and did it again. Then I sat down at that table with a cup of coffee and opened my banking app. My rent had cleared. My paycheck had landed. My account balance wasn't huge, but I knew exactly what it was. I knew what I owed. I knew what I had. That still felt almost unbelievable. My former mother-in-law came over the following weekend with a plant I absolutely didn't need, and 3 containers of food I absolutely did. We sat at the table. She touched the edge of it and said, "Nice. I built it." She looked underneath. "Don't inspect it." I didn't say anything. "You were about to." She smiled. For a while, we talked about normal things. Her sister, my job, my sister's latest dating disaster. Then she said, "He's still angry with me." I nodded. "He thinks I chose you." I looked at her carefully. "Did you?" She shook her head. I chose not to keep choosing for him. That stayed with me. I still get angry too fast sometimes. I still over-explain purchases in my own head. I still have days where one small thing reminds me of that party and my stomach drops. I still hate blue dresses more than a normal person should. And yes, sometimes I wonder whether reporting him at work was the right thing to do for the right reason. I know the facts were true. I also know I wanted him to hurt. Both things can exist. The biggest difference now is that I don't spend all day editing my own feelings into something easier for someone else to live with. When I'm angry, I try not to throw cake. Progress. When I'm scared about money, I check the account instead of asking somebody else what we can afford. When my mother sends a message that starts drifting toward the old blame, I stop responding. When my former mother-in-law defends one small thing about her son, I remember she is allowed to love him without agreeing with him. And when my ex-husband sends something designed to drag me into an argument, I usually leave it alone. Usually. One quiet evening after I had settled into the apartment, I finished unpacking the last box in the living room. It was mostly books, framed photos, and random things I'd kept, because throwing them away felt too dramatic. I put a few things on the shelf. I checked my phone. No messages I needed to answer. I checked my account one last time and saw the rent was paid with money I had earned. Then I turned off the living room light. Just a quiet apartment, a slightly crooked kitchen table, and the strange feeling of knowing that every decision inside those walls was finally mine.